We are back with this bombshell breakthrough in the impeachment probe. A top diplomat and Trump loyalist reversing course and admitting a bribery plot with Ukraine. It's a major development because Ambassador Sondland, as we've been reporting, was handpicked by Trump, a top donor to the 2016 campaign, and someone who literally went to bat for Trump on this very scandal. He texted Trump's defense in real time. He claimed to Congress initially he didn't think there was a bribe. So tonight's news comes only after he faced new evidence and pressure for potential perjury. We've been covering how some Trump aides admit the whole bribery plot in public and claim it's okay. Some call it going full Mulvaney. This looks more like a reverse Mulvaney. Admit the plot after denying it. And while Mulvaney claimed that whatever happened was fine, Sondland's new testimony today says the Ukraine plot was improper and he assumed illegal. So how do Trump's Republican allies and the rest of Congress deal with this? I want to bring in, fresh and live from Capitol Hill, Jake Sherman from Politico, who's been all over the story, and John Flannery back with me. Jake, first of all, this news comes amidst some new developments you've been reporting on that Republicans are trying to fortify their defense. What do you got?
Yeah, so Kevin McCarthy, the House Minority Leader, House Republican leader, and a close ally of Donald Trump, is going to place Jim Jordan, another close ally of the president, on the Intelligence Committee. And here's why that's significant. First of all, we don't really see many pinch hitters, so to speak, or substitutions on big committees like that in the middle of Congress for seemingly no reason. Sometimes there's a vacancy and you need to fill it, but that's not the case here. And the Intelligence Committee has basically become an impeachment committee. That's how Republicans see it. This is the center of gravity in this probe, and Donald Trump and the House Republican leadership want some of their strongest allies, their strongest defenders of the president on that committee. So we expect Jim Jordan to...
You say strongest. Other people, the Democratic side, have said, well, they're just reaching for people who will defend anything.
Yeah.
Put Jim Jordan as a spirited warrior in that context for us.
Yeah, strongest, I mean, most fervent, most firm, and most upfront in public. I'm not passing judgment on the character of what he's saying, but he has been willing to take proverbial bullets for Donald Trump for a long time.
You know, Jake, if you want a good pinch hitter, they got to be willing to go to bat, right? I mean,
yeah, that's right. And listen, I think there are some people who believe that Devin Nunes has not been up to the task. That has been chatted about kind of behind the scenes on Capitol Hill. And Jordan is somebody who will go out there publicly and defend the president. And remember, this is going to move to a public phase very, very soon.
So let me get you on that as well as our ace on the hill. You're talking about the public phase. I want to play a little bit of recent, but perhaps now wildly out of date remarks by Lindsey Graham, because he previously was hanging his hat on the idea that either there wasn't this bribery plot or it wouldn't be provable. Tonight, you have someone who's literally still Trump's ambassador corroborating it. Take a look at what we might call classic Lindsey Graham.
If you're looking for a circumstance where the President of the United States was threatening the Ukraine with cutting off aid unless they investigated his political opponent, you would be very disappointed. That does not exist.
Fact check, false. Evidence exists, and that evidence now has been stacked. I'm going to go to you and then John. The evidence has been stacked from people that might be considered career or even critical of some of Donald Trump's policies to now someone who's loyal. Jake, how does that play out? I imagine we're not going to hear that argument from a lot of Republicans tonight.
The argument you're going to hear is that there was no statement from the Ukrainians at the end of the day, and the aid was restored. So could there be a quid pro quo? That's what I've been just on the phone with a lot of my Republican sources, and that's the line they've been firing back to me. And they say, listen, how could there be a quid pro quo if the U.S. has now restored this aid without that statement they were seeking?
John?
Yeah, well, it's the kind of Orwellian newspeak we've gotten used to when the evidence is there and manifest and obvious. And it's interesting to choose Lindsey Graham as an example of the point of the spear, if you will, because I first met him when he was coming to the Judiciary Committee, and he was sort of dropped in there to prosecute the Clinton impeachment. And he did that in the committee as actively as he could. And he became one of the managers that went over to the Senate. And we've since seen what he said then contradicted by his positions now. So the best you can say is that he is a flexible advocate. But worse than that is all of these members who are saying these things have seen the primary documents and the testimony. They know what they're saying is false. That means they're part of an obstruction. They're no better
Right.
than the lieutenants of the obstruction by the syndicate that comes out of the West Wing.
To draw the point there, John, that's what I think Gordon Sondland may have been worried about. Jake, on the Hill, last question with the little time we have. When will we see public hearings?
It has to be this month, and that's what Democrats are now saying. But again, then we're going to enter a real high wire phase here where Republicans and Democrats both have significant risks, according to people in both parties. I mean, Republicans do run the risk of grasping at straws, they think, and they think that they are going to have to try to create distractions to detract from what is now quite clear in testimony. The big question for Democrats is who do they bring to Capitol Hill to testify? Who is up for it, and how many people can they get to Capitol Hill to testify publicly against the sitting president? And it's not entirely clear yet. There's some names being batted back and forth, but this is a high pressure situation and historic situation. So we'll have to see who they choose and how that plays out.
A very busy evening unfolding here on Capitol Hill and in the legal part of all of this. So I appreciate both of you making time for us. Jake and John, thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, I'm Ari Melber from MSNBC. You can see more of our videos right here, or better yet, subscribe to our YouTube channel below. You could have been anywhere in the world, but you're here with us, and we appreciate that.